All right, we're in Hebrews chapters 1 and 2. The first question reads, how did God speak to the fathers or ancestors? This is in verse 1. In the past, God spoke to our forefathers through the prophets at many times and in various ways. So he spoke to the forefathers through the prophets. How has he spoken to us is the second question. In verse 2 it says, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son. So you have here the prophets with the means by which God spoke to the forefathers, and the Son is the means by which he has spoken to us in these last days. In chapter 1, the rest of chapter 1, the author is proving that blank is better than blank. What are the blanks here? Well, you can see very directly in verses 4 and 5, and this is still talking about the Son. So he became as much superior to the angels as the name he has inherited is better than theirs. Is superior to theirs. In verse 5, for to which of the angels did God ever say, you are my son, today I have become your father? And so the larger portion of the rest of the chapter is dedicated to going to the Old Testament and pulling out quotes referring to the Messiah, the Son of God, and showing how these quotes prove that the Son is better than angels. And so that's the answer to the question. The author is proving that the Son is better than angels. Now this will launch us into an overview discussion of the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is written to Hebrews, particularly Hebrew Christians, towards the latter part of the first century. And so we've come now to a point where many Christians are disappointed, are disheartened because Jesus has not yet come. And many of these individuals have suffered great loss, thinking that Jesus was coming back maybe in a few months after his ascension, maybe in a few years after his ascension. But now decades have passed, so many things have happened, and they're getting tired. And also these are Jews, these are Hebrews, and so they're looking back with longing over the things that they gave up to follow this Christianity. They gave up all the physical glory of the temple. They gave up all of the physical visibility of the priesthood. They gave up all of the things that they had grown up learning to be important and valuable. And now they're discouraged and they're beginning to lose heart. They're tempted to cast away their confidence. That's what it says in chapter 10. They're tempted to not hold fast anymore to the profession of their faith. And so the primary thrust of this book is to encourage these believers and to encourage them to keep their confidence in what they have heard, keep their confidence in what they have put their trust in, not let go of their confidence, but to hold fast until the end. So that's, I believe, the overview thrust of the book. And here we find the first comparison saying that the Son, whom you have accepted, is so much better than the angels. Why is that significant to them? The angels are the means by which it was understood that God communicated with the prophets. So angels spoke to the prophets, and they were giving them the word of God, and the prophets spoke to the forefathers. So here, essentially, we're comparing the word of the prophets, the Old Testament, to the word of the Son, essentially the New Testament, and particularly the Gospels here, the words of Jesus. And the author is trying to prove how much better that word is. And just as the Jews had a high reverence, a high regard, great solemnity, and great respect with which they held the Old Testament scriptures, the words of the prophets, if those were great and to be held in high regard, and if you think highly of them, then how much more should you think of the words of the Son, who is so much better than the means by which God communicated to the prophets? That's the point that's being made here. Let's go on to the next question. According to chapter 2, verses 1 through 4, what should this mean? And so we see here kind of the obvious point. Verse 1, we must pay more careful attention, therefore, based on what I said in chapter 1, we must pay more careful attention to what we have heard, the things we've heard from the Son, so that we do not drift away. And then again, comparing, if the word spoken by angels was binding and every violation and disobedience received its just punishment, how shall we escape if we ignore such a great salvation? And here we find the content of the words of the Son. The content of the message that Jesus spoke were the words of salvation. And if we neglect this, how much worse would be our loss and our punishment than those who forsook the words that were spoken by angels. And this is the message here of chapter 2, verses 1 through 4.